So now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce my boss. Sandra Evers-Manley is the Vice President of Corporate Responsibility for Northrop Grumman, and she wears a few hats in this role. She has a varied range of responsibilities, which include corporate-wide EEO, diversity, inclusion, ethics, charitable giving, community relations, employee recognition programs, and recently is our boss and our mentor and our leader for the Operation Impact Program. She began her Northrop Grumman career as a summer intern while she was in college. And so I could go on and read a lot about her, but I know her and I know she wouldn't want me to do that. So I'm going to stop because she is my boss. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Sandra Evers-Manley. Sandra?
Thank you so much, Dwayne, and good morning, everyone. Let me just take this opportunity on behalf of our Chairman, CEO, and President, Mr. Westbush, to welcome you here to Northrop Grumman, and to some of you to welcome you back. This for us is an exciting day. It's a day about opportunity. It's a day about challenge. It's a day about celebration, and it's a day about making a difference. And we're so honored to partner with each of you, your respective organizations, for us to make an even greater corporate America and an even greater America. And this morning, we're about to hear from one of those great advocates, a great leader in our country, who has truly made a difference for individuals with disabilities. She is not just someone that talks the talk, but she truly walks the walk. And we're just so honored to be able to have her here with us today to talk a little bit about some of the great things that are happening, the great opportunities where we can even make a greater difference. We are excited to be able to host today's Network of Champions. We're excited about to hear from our speaker, but I would be remiss if I didn't first thank Mr. Dwayne Hardesty and Karen Stang, who are our champions, who help to keep us focused on the right thing. So thank you, Dwayne, and thank you, Karen, for your tremendous work. So let me introduce our speaker, Carol Glazier, President, National Organization of Disability. Carol joined National Organization of Disability in 2006 as the Executive Director of its National Employability Partnership. She became president in October 2008. Under her leadership, the National Organization of Disabilities has doubled its revenue and increased its net assets by more than 300%. That's what you talk about leadership. She has not only increased the focus on employment by a factor of 10 and developed a new important relationship with the U.S. Army, leading employers, national and local foundations, scores of new corporate donors to their programs, and the CEO Council. She put in place the National Disability Signature Employment Demonstrations, Wounded Warrior Careers, and Bridge Program to Business. I could go on and on about our great speaker, but I think we're all here to hear from her. Please welcome the phenomenal Carol Glazier.
It's a pleasure to be here. So first I was a cat that's being herded by Dwayne, and then Sandra really raised expectations with those wonderful remarks. Thank you, Sandra. Hope I can live up to it. When we got the invitation to speak here today, the significance of the date was not lost on us. And I think most of us know who are in this field that today is the day that the new rules that were issued this summer by the Department of Labor that affect federal contractors go into effect. New affirmative hiring guidelines, both for veterans, protected veterans, as well as people with disabilities. First time ever numerical hiring goals. We believe that this act by government has the potential to be even more sweeping than even the ADA in terms of disability employment. As we know from the 70s, affirmative action, in the wake of the civil rights movement, the hiring numbers didn't really change until affirmative action came along. And similarly with the ADA, which is almost a quarter of a century old now, the employment numbers for people with disabilities have not changed since then. This has the potential, really, to change the game. And I think all of you here, whether you're service providers or veterans or employers, know about this. If you don't now, you soon will. And it's a pleasure to be here today, hosted by a company like Northrop Grumman, which has been a leader in this area well before they were required to be as a federal contractor. And it's good to know that we have role models of companies like Northrop Grumman and others in your network of champions that can lead the way for us. I wanted, though, to connect the dots for today on something else, and that is the year 2014. And that year marks the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And I think that many of us in this field don't necessarily see our work as a civil rights issue. We see it as a medical issue. We see it as fixing an impairment. But I think if you really stop and think about it, particularly if you see disability as a normal part of the human condition, something that just about all of us will experience at some point in our life, then you realize that people with disabilities, just like people who are part of racial, ethnic minorities, women, LGBT, have a right and an opportunity to participate in going to the theater, in going to church, and most importantly, to succeed in the workplace, in the workforce. The signing of the Civil Rights Act is something some of us in this room might remember. I'm one of those people. You remember probably where you were when JFK was shot and when Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, and that same year when Bobby Kennedy was killed. We all have a vivid memory of where we were on that day, just as vivid as those of us who remember 9/11. Closer to home, I just want to acknowledge Medgar Evers, a cousin of Sandra Evers Manley, a leader in the civil rights movement, slain and buried right here in our backyard in Arlington with a proper burial with honors as a veteran of the Vietnam War. When Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, he said these words: "Those who founded our country knew that freedom, not only for independence, but for personal liberty and justice, would be secure only if each generation fought to renew and enlarge its meaning. Americans of every race and color have died in battle to protect that freedom and to build a nation of widening opportunities. Now our generation of Americans has been called on to continue the unending search for justice. We have come to a time of testing, and we must not fail." Those words are as true today as they were a half a century ago. But today the fight is for equal opportunity and justice for all Americans with disabilities, including injured veterans. So today you'll hear about best practices, you'll hear what employers are doing to recruit and support veterans who are coming into their workforce, whether they're disabled or not. If you believe RAND, 1 out of every 4 veterans is going to have a disability. You just may not know it. You'll hear great things about my organization and many others who are out there trying to help employers to do a better job of hiring veterans and hiring people with disabilities. And you'll hear, most importantly, that those veterans need and deserve a special brand of support, but that the investment pays itself back. And I have to quote Dwayne, as you're herding cats, you also, oh, I thought you were Dwayne, Karen. Sorry. Where are you, Dwayne? Dwayne says, "With a modicum of flexibility and understanding, you're likely to find a disciplined and successful team member." It's all true, and it's all part of the central theme today. But also, again, remember, today and throughout this year that giving veterans with disabilities the best odds of success is not about a medical problem. It's not about fixing a disability. It's not about giving a veteran a handout or expecting any less of him or her. And it's not about taking any greater risk than you would with any employee. It's about the call to action that Lyndon Johnson issued when he signed the Civil Rights Act, in which he asked every public official, every religious leader, every business, every professional, and every working man, his word, to bring justice and a deep respect for human dignity to all people. So thank you to Sandra, to Dwayne, to Karen, and the rest of your leadership at Northrop Grumman for being a beacon for what other companies can do, both to meet these federal guidelines and to answer the call of action. And most of all, to all of you for your continuing struggle for justice and ensuring that our generation of warriors in the civil rights struggle succeeds. And with that, I'm going to start our presentation. I don't know, Karen, do you want us to go right through? Dwayne? So we're going to, this is hard. Let's see if we can do this. Walk and chew gum at the same time. I'm here today with my colleague, Bill Lockwood. Bill, where are you? Bill runs our Wounded Warrior Careers program. We'll talk more about that program and what we've learned about the kind of support that seriously injured veterans need as they transition into the civilian workforce when they come home from combat. NOD is a 30-year-old organization. We've always focused on various quality of life issues affecting people with disabilities. But this year, and in the last 5 years, our exclusive focus has been on employment as the single biggest barrier to a good quality of life for people with disabilities. We have had several programs working in the disability employment field. The ones we'll talk about here today our Wounded Warrior Careers demonstration program, and some research we did about the career aspirations and needs and support needs for seriously injured veterans. Our Bridges to Business program helps companies to meet their disability hiring goals. Our surveys, and I would cite the Disability Employment Tracker, which is a confidential self-assessment tool. We've had, in the first round, we've had 50 companies sign up for it. What they get back is a very complete report, not only on how you stack up against other companies, but also about best practices and the actual regulation, and where in the regulation a particular question relates to. So that Disability Employment Tracker is something some of you here today have taken, but I would encourage you in the next round. There's some interesting data that tracker illuminated, and I would just highlight one piece, and that is that of the 50 companies we surveyed, most of them federal contractors, everybody is doing much better on veteran employment than they are on people with disabilities. We can talk about the reasons for that, but it was a piece of data that we didn't necessarily expect to find. Our CEO Council, some of you here today are members of that CEO Council. That's more the outward-facing group of corporate employers who want to be seen as employers of choice for people with disabilities and also leaders among their peers. And then Start on Success, which is a career transition program for students with disabilities that begins in high school, similar to the Project Search model, except Start on Success interns are paid for their work. We were approached by the Army in 2006. Donald Rumsfeld was at the time setting up a program, transitioning a program into something he was calling the Army Wounded Warrior Program, AW2. And he believed that all veterans, even the most seriously injured, should be productive, contributing members of their communities when they come home. What that means obviously will differ, but that every veteran deserves a chance to be in the workforce, if that's what he or she wants to do, to pursue an education, even pursue volunteer work. That kind of productive engagement was critical. He came to NOD and said, could you help me design a component for the AW2 program that will relate to career? And that began a relationship with the Army. It was codified in an MOU. We started off with focus groups. We talked to over 200 veterans and family members to find out what their issues were, what their career needs were. And we designed a demonstration in concert with the Army where we co-located career specialists with AW2 caseworkers so that those caseworkers referred over to us, veterans that they deemed ready, willing, and able to work. And our career specialists took over and provided a whole web of support that Bill will talk about in more detail. We started in 3 sites. We added a 4th. So far, we have 200 and, Bill, are we up to 300 yet with Pittsburgh? So we're at or slightly above 300. And we started just with the Army, but in our Pittsburgh program, we're actually branching out to a Guard and Reserve population because that's what the Pittsburgh area has in great abundance. The outcomes of the program so far have been about twice the success rate of AW2 veterans who are not getting these kinds of support services. So it's not a scientific evaluation, but certainly we've been collecting a lot of data going all the way back now for 6 years on that caseload of 300. And success for us is defined as placement in a job, placement in a training program, or placement in school. The research that we did, I mentioned earlier, it's in a publication called Return to Careers. I'd encourage all of you to read it because it really does have some very good data about what veterans and their family members are experiencing when they come back home and try to access the civilian workforce. It tells you all the problems with translating your MOS into civilian skills and all of the other issues, but how veterans in particular view those issues, experience those issues, and what their aspirations are. Bill, I think I'm going to turn over to you now.
Thank you, Carol. It's a pleasure to be here today. We're very proud of the work that we have done working with veterans with disabilities. And today what I'm going to do is focus more on post-placement support, what happens after they're placed in the workforce. So many of you may have seen similar presentations from us in the past, but I'll try to avoid too much duplication here. One of the first things that I would like to mention is that we talk about the signature injuries of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the estimate is about 30% of the 2.4 million who have served will have some form of post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury, or depression. And we know that that scares some employers and it scares some managers because they're worried based on the media reports of what will happen if they bring somebody into the workplace that has these conditions. So if we're looking at approximately maybe 800,000 veterans who have these conditions, that might be cause for concern. However, there are 27 million Americans in the workforce who have similar injuries, similar conditions, TBI, depression, post-traumatic stress. So even if you don't hire veterans, you can learn something from this because you're going to have folks in the workplace that are struggling with these issues. And we view the veterans as being the leading edge, and they're going to help change the workplace as a result of their of the conditions that they have, and by you bringing them in and learning how to work with them. Now, the other misperception is kind of fomented by the media typically that maybe post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury will result in violence in the workplace. And these are really, we use this to talk about what happens when you have these conditions. How do you, what's the effect in the workplace? Try to look at it from the workplace. It's disorganization. It may be memory problems. It could be anxiety or panic attacks that affect your ability to perform. Most often it results in frustration. These are people who have had very successful careers. They've had a lot of responsibility. And when they get into the workplace and they discover that they can't do as well as they thought they could do, they can't remember, or there's something that they just can't figure out, have a hard time adjusting to, it's frustrating. And it can make a major impact on their performance. That doesn't mean that without the proper support, they won't be loyal and dedicated team members, because they will. For those of you who are in HR, I'd ask you to think about what might be the indication that in a human resource role, someone was suffering from post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury, or depression. What do you think you might see? Absences, job abandonment, maybe a manager coming in saying, I don't understand why this person can't do this. These are all really common symptoms, and you're probably seeing that in those other 27 million folks that are in the workplace. So I would ask you to consider that. Now, what are the challenges of hidden injuries as opposed to visible injuries? One of the statistics that I've seen recently is that there are about 52,000 soldiers who were wounded in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, when compared to the possibly 800,000 who are dealing with psychological and cognitive issues. That's not a lot. You won't know who these individuals are unless they tell you. And there's a stigma of mental illness. So these are viewed as weaknesses by many people. They may not disclose, so it may be important for you to recognize that there is something else going on and provide them the support they need to be able to succeed. There is a fear among many veterans that they won't be hired simply because they're veterans, because someone might consider that they do have traumatic brain injury or post-traumatic stress. Another thing is that you may hire someone, or someone may return from a deployment who is fine, and then after a while the injuries begin to appear. And so it's important to be able to recognize them, because very often the individual who is injured doesn't recognize it themselves. Naturally, there's a fear on being diagnosed because that might affect your career. And probably one of the things that's most important is symptoms and effects change over time. So you should, just saying, well, we've worked with this individual, it's all taken care of, something else may happen. So support is extremely important as a result of that. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about the wounded warriors. And most of you have worked with these veterans. You're aware of who the wounded warriors are. Let me tell you what the typical wounded warrior in our study, how the typical wounded warrior in our study appeared. First and foremost, it's important to understand that they're mid-career. An average age of 34. They're married, predominantly, at least 2 children under the age of 18. Significant family responsibilities. Most were in combat specialties, so they would have been in infantry, armor. These are specialties that don't really, as those of you who have been in the military know, don't really translate very well into a civilian job, since most of us don't have armies in our civilian corporations. They have limited work experience prior to joining the military. Most of them, when they came into the military, didn't really know what their career path was. They thought they were going to be in the military. With an all-volunteer army, the goal was to be in the military or to gain the GI Bill benefits to be able to develop a career. Typically have a high school degree or a GED, and prior to leaving the military with 7 years of service, somewhere around an E5, we're probably making about $51,000 a year in total compensation. That's housing, subsistence, and base pay. So they aren't entry level, and I think this is very important to understand. Other areas that you should understand is that they don't really recognize they're disabled. Nobody wants to be disabled. It's not a label that you take on. And they aren't really familiar with disability. They didn't grow up with a disability. In fact, they wouldn't be in the military if they weren't healthy and able-bodied in order to be in the military. Many of them are still healing. Healing can take time. And I think this is also an extremely important point. We've all changed jobs. I'm assuming most of us in here, from the looks of it. Everybody in here has gotten a job, been employed, changed jobs. This isn't a job change. This is a major life change. They're changing their career. They're changing their employer. They're leaving the community that they have been in. They're leaving a culture that they have been in. And they have a new disability. And in most cases, they aren't even sure how that disability affects them yet. So they can't predict how they'll perform in a job because they don't know what the job is and they haven't had an opportunity to do it. Once again, these are not insurmountable problems. They're just reality. So what do they expect of employers? When we did the Return to Careers project, we spent a lot of time looking at what they wanted out of employers. And what they wanted was fair consideration. So veteran hiring preference, they thought that should mean something. And very often they're kind of mystified by applying for a job and hearing nothing in response. Or excited because they got the automated response from the resume management system. They expect good supervision and management. They want a well-defined career path. They'd like to know where they're going. They're willing to get their foot in the door, but they need to know where that is going to lead them as they go on. They expect the education and training that they need to be able to do their job. They like performance feedback. They want to know how they're doing. And they want to do significant work. Once again, these veterans have had very great responsibilities in their military positions. And so sometimes the offer of just any job is really demotivating to them. They feel like they've been pushed aside by society. So I'm not going to dwell on this, but there are some workplace challenges. They've got to adjust to the culture. They've got to adjust to the new career, and they don't really necessarily feel like they fit in. So when we did our work, what we identified was in what we call the Intensive Career Transition Support Model. And what this model does is essentially it says you have to begin knowing where you're going. I mean, that's a pretty basic idea, I think. Stephen Covey liked it. But you really need to take some time planning. It's difficult to plan a career when you don't have any idea what the job is on the outside. So it takes some personal support. Also, individuals that may be having memory issues, focus issues, may not come back to this very well. So they need some guidance, somebody who really understands both the military and the civilian world. They need to prepare. Many of the people that we have worked with in the 5 years, the veterans that we have worked with, are still in the preparation phase. School may take a little longer, or they may need first a bachelor's degree, then a master's degree in order to be able to achieve their career goals. They need more support in job seeking. And this is where employers can really come in and help them out. Job previews, the opportunity to do internships, to look at what the work is and say, yes, I can do this job, that job is going to be difficult for me. Very helpful there. And finally, post-placement support, which is, of course, really all about employers. We can't rely on other agencies to do this particular work. It's a lighter touch work. It involves mentorship in the workplace. So post-placement support is absolutely essential. And now I want to talk a little bit about how we know that personalized support, I mean, that makes sense, but in our work in the Wounded Warrior Careers Program, what we found, I think about this as self-directed career transition, which is what most of us have done. You get your resume together, figure out what you want to do, and then you go try to do that. And maybe you find out it doesn't work, so you do something else. And over time, you begin to figure out where you are. But with support, they can do much better. So we saw an 85% increase in education and training and work. When they came into our program, there was an increase in volunteering because we were able to guide them to where they could volunteer. There was an increase in employment because we were able to help them make the transition and get the support that they needed, and an increase in education and training. Part of that is due to the recession, which after looking for jobs, many went to school, but that means there's a much more highly trained base out there in the recruiting pool. We found that timing is important. There was a 29% fall off in those who waited a year after they left the military to begin their transition. Ideally, if you can catch them before they begin the transition, which is, of course, a lot about what Project Impact does, it will help them make the transition better and more easily. And we also found that there was a relationship between the number of days of contact they had with a navigator, a guide, a mentor, and their successful transition, almost double. So that was an important piece. Now, based on the data that we have, we can't say that's absolutely a direct causation, but we can say that there is a relationship there. So overall in our program, we achieved a 70% engagement rate, education, training, and work, compared to about a 30 to 40% rate in those who didn't have support. You probably would see the same thing in the folks that you work with that are in your companies. There's a relationship between support and retention. We saw that once they had career goals, they had confidence in their ability to achieve those goals. Not only that, they knew what their goals were, which is important. Very, very often, especially with memory issues, they might not know what the goal is, but a good motivating goal stays with them and they remember it. It's work that they want to do. Overall, we estimate that the cost of this is about $3,500 per employee per year. This is for our program, which was just dedicated to these wounded warriors. So it's not expensive. You probably spend more than that on a lot of other programs each year. So, conclusion, it helps to have support. The self-directed model, which is focused on the job only, just get a job. No support or limited navigation support. Maybe, here's a good idea, have a resume. Another good idea would be to network. A lot of times there's no consideration given to disability or the impairment that results from the disability. And there's all of this transition that goes on. You're handed from one recruiter to another recruiter to another recruiter, or from one agency to another agency to another agency. Along the way, the goals change, they get confused, and pretty soon you're back to the job. So this is why we talk about supported career transition, which is an important, you all play a very important role in this. It's focused on the career, it's focused on the veteran. I'd ask you to maybe turn your recruiting processes upside down. Start with the veteran, not with the job. You probably have a job somewhere that will fit. It's proactive, it involves outreach, and it's got to be consistent. Coaching and mentoring are important. It matters if you have someone that you can talk to as you're going through the process. Now, here, I'd offer this as kind of a model for what you have to do in providing post-placement support. First of all, it begins with preparation. Figure out if you're really ready to do this. It's going to take some effort. It will be well worth the effort, but it will take some effort. You have to begin with the recruiting process. You can't just begin with, okay, we've got them hired now, let's figure this all out. They may be, as I've said, they may not know which job will work, and because they haven't seen these jobs. So an opportunity to move around. Some supervisors work well with people with disabilities. Others aren't quite so flexible. And I think we all know that. And then you've got to provide support. Onboarding, we'll be talking about that today. The onboarding process is important. Mentors, once again, I can't emphasize that too much. Understand how to accommodate. And look, that maybe the first accommodation isn't going to be the only one that's needed, but there's got to be an accommodation out there that will work. And then finally, keep training them, keep providing performance feedback, and you'll retain them. Keep motivating them and engaging them. And so that's a model. I think we're going to talk about all of those aspects during the session today. And then I would also say here just that there are some resources. Carol mentioned the Disability Employment Tracker. It helps you figure out if maybe you're culturally ready and if you've got the systems in place to support veterans in the workplace and people with disabilities. There's two components of it. One is disability, one is veterans. And then our Bridges to Business is an advisory service that helps connect employers with service providers and with the people with disabilities. I think one of the common things we especially hear with folks who are beginning programs to hire veterans is, so exactly where do you find them? Where are they? And they aren't always right where you're looking for them. They aren't just standing outside the door.